So I'm streaming right now. Yes,
This is GIMI Productions on the track. GIMI Productions exclusive. Brand new beat.
I lost your audio case. I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
yes, we are in the political war room, and hey, this is Case Study QB. We are in the progressive war room with Jess Scarane, who ran in the primaries in the Delaware primaries against Chris Coons, and we're going to hear to talk political strategy. We're going to get down into the nitty gritty of strategy, and hopefully, one of the future progressive candidates, you will be able to learn from this show on some tips on how you can run not in this cycle, it's too late for this cycle, but in 2022, 2024. Just say hi to the people.
Hello to the people. Thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. Thank you for coming on the show. And I was so looking forward to the show. And I really want to get into the nitty gritty, some wisdom. So the first question I want to ask you first, what have you been up to since the race? And what's anything that you're going on right now? You can let us know.
Yeah, absolutely. So, obviously, I unfortunately did not prevail in the primary, in the Democratic primary in September. But what was fantastic for the state of Delaware is that a really great slate of progressive candidates did and have gone on to general elections. So that's been my focus since September 15th is who can we help, who can we boost to make sure that they get over the finish line on November 3rd to get them into our state house and into our state senate. Because this is a year that really has an opportunity to be a milestone and a turning point for our state. We have candidates who running who support a living wage, who support expanding things like Medicaid and guaranteeing health care to people in our state, a Green New Deal for Delaware, like things that were incredibly important in my run at a federal level. We have candidates at the state level that share those same values and those same policy priorities. And it's incredibly important to get them elected. So that's who I've been focusing on, and can certainly share some names and info for people if you want to post that with the show later to other people who are looking to get involved in these last few days.
Okay, so definitely, I'm hoping that at the end of the show, we can, or near the end of the show, I want you to definitely give us those names, and we're gonna give them some shine. So the first question I want to ask you, what was the process like just to even start, just to run for the Delaware Senate? Just give us that process.
Yeah, so we kicked off our campaign. Honestly, we're coming up on a year ago. We launched in mid-November, but we had been doing work for a couple months before that. In Delaware, basically the process is you start running a campaign, but you have to file as a candidate. The deadline to file as a candidate is in July. Our primary is the latest primary in the country, so things are kind of set back from everyone else's races. So we started our campaign in November, started building our base of support, volunteers. The reason that I felt like that was going to be even a possibility or something that we could tackle is because of the team that I had around me.
Nice.
We had people who had experience running campaigns, either as staff or as super volunteers.
Okay.
Because we have had at least a couple cycles of progressive candidates running in Delaware. So people who had experience with that, people who knew that I had volunteered on campaigns previously.
Okay.
And knowing that I had that ring of support was incredibly crucial. Like that is the thing that I would not have done this without the team that I had from day one.
Mm-hmm.
And because I knew they were going to be able to support me and to build out the team that we needed. So we launched in November.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, you get right on the fundraising train, you get right on the volunteer recruitment train.
Mm-hmm.
And we knew that we were going to run a campaign that was focused on voter contact. That was one of our primary goals, as well as strategic pegs. It's how do we make sure that we get in front of people and bring a message to them, but also bring our ability to listen to them and to bring back what we hear from them, to fold that into our policy, to fold that into the platform and the work that we're doing. So that's why recruiting volunteers from day one was incredibly important as well. We launched canvases that very first week. We were phone banking that very first week. We were texting that very first week.
Wow.
Because we knew that we had to build our name recognition. We knew that we could actually talk to more voters, knock on more doors in the state of Delaware than had ever been done before. And that was a goal that we set for ourselves.
Can I ask you?
That changed.
Can I jump in real quick? Because I want to ask you, what was that infrastructure like at the very beginning with those first volunteers? Meaning, like, were you working out of a library? I know some libraries allow you to rent their hall or their conference room. Go ahead.
No, we were in my dining room.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
Right. I mean, honestly, we ended up, because the pandemic hit, we ended up not renting an office, because we were about to sign a lease when the lockdown orders went into place, and we were basically like, we're not going to be able to use this space.
Yeah.
So we didn't do it.
And
oh wow. That's in some ways unfortunate. It is harder to obviously have these conversations, not necessarily in person, but we were just taking people's safety and health really seriously. So we launched out of my dining room, out of my house, and some other people had some space in their homes that they were able to share with us, which we're obviously very grateful for.
Nice.
But yeah, we looked for the places where if we didn't necessarily have to spend, we didn't, because we really wanted to make sure that donations went into voter contact.
Awesome.
Staff that were our organizers, that were our super volunteers, like we tried to make sure that all of our dollars were being used effectively.
Okay. So you mentioned super volunteer twice. Sure. I want to know, what's the difference between a regular volunteer and a super volunteer?
I think the cutoff is not always the same, but the people who kind of show up over and over, who you can tell are really passionate about either your cause or your candidate, that are going to be able to give a good amount of their time, who can become organizers on their own within your campaign. Those are kind of the super balls.
Nice. So have you elevated any of your super volunteers after like maybe a couple months? You said, man, you know what? This could be my communications chair. Go ahead.
Yes. Yeah. So we hired people, like brought on staff, mostly as organizers. We basically started paying people as organizers to do the work that they were doing, but do it for us at least, 20 hours a week. We lived our values. We paid people $18 an hour, because that's what a living wage is in Delaware. Like, we made sure that we were doing what we
Nice. Wait, officially the living wage in Delaware is 18?
Yeah, so that's the housing wage. So we looked at, to rent a median one-bedroom apartment in the state of Delaware, you need to be making $18 an hour to do that comfortably.
Wow, I commend you for that. Wow.
Yeah, right. And a lot of times it's hard to say, we have limited resources. Like, how could we get the most out of every dollar? But you should never be doing that on the backs of your workers, right? And so that's how do we pay people equitably?
Now that we're talking about staff to a certain extent, so we talked about the volunteer and how you promoted them to official staff or part-time staff. Did you bring anyone that had experience from other campaigns, and you found that person? How did you find that person, and how did they help you out? What type of experience did they bring to your campaign?
Yeah, so our core team came out of working on Carrie Evelyn Harris's run for Senate in 2018. So members of the team that were really our campaign managers, our field director, comms, those were people who had worked on, or at least volunteered heavily on that campaign before, as well as having experience on a mayoral campaign in the city of Wilmington. A gentleman by the name of Eugene Young had run for mayor, which was actually a campaign I was involved in too. So people came out of these local campaigns, and that was important to me too, is focusing on people who had Delaware campaign experience, I think every state has its own brand of uniqueness when you're running for political office, and we wanted to make sure that we had people who knew Delaware, who knew what works here and what doesn't, so that we weren't fighting battles with outside consultants saying no, that's really not going to fly here. We have to couch this in a different way. That was always something that people brought to the table inherently just from having done it.
Awesome, awesome. So let me ask you this question, and this is for the person that doesn't have a clue when they're running and they're campaigning. So do you have a strategy like right out the gate, or maybe that campaign, one of the people on your staff said, okay, this is Delaware. Here's the detailed strategy. We got to get this district, we need to get 30% of the vote out of here. What was that official strategy? Did you have that at the very beginning, or did you just do everything and then at some point in the campaign you whittled down your strategy to something else? Go ahead.
No, we certainly started with a campaign plan and a win number. Saying,
Oh, okay.
This is what we think we need. These are the number of votes we think we need to win.
Okay.
And I'll commend my team. They had the right win number. Now, did we get the votes? No, but we had the right number. And I think that itself is challenging because you have to take into account how motivated people are going to be in this race, what turnout's going to look like, and take a estimate of where you think that vote is going to be, and then say how much of it do you need to win, and then where are you going to get it from.
So
And
what was that win number? I'm not clear on what was that exactly.
So that's 60,000 votes.
Okay.
There was about
okay.
120,000 turnout in our Democratic primary, which was a dramatic increase. In 2018, the turnout was about 84,000, I think. So we knew that it's a presidential year. People are very engaged right now. We're going to see more votes. So that's how you have to factor those things in of what you think historically. You look at what historically has happened and how you think this year might be different. So we said we need 60,000 votes to win. And then you look at, where are you going to get those from? How much do you think you can get, in our case, out of the city of Wilmington, out of Newcastle County? And there's only 3 counties in Delaware. So the largest portion of the population lives in Newcastle County, the northernmost county. What do we think we can get there? And then what can we get out of Kent and Sussex County? Are we talking about more of are we looking at the west side of the state, the east side of the state, and trying to say, where do we think our votes are? And that can also be driven by the conversations that you're having. So if you're phone banking or you're canvassing, and as you build through different turfs, as they're called, you start to see how receptive are people here. Are we getting more support out of this district? Well, then maybe we need to go heavily there and try to get as much support as we can. Are we not doing so well over here? How can we break through? Or how do we say maybe that's just not where our voters are? So those are the types of conversations you have to be able to have with your team.
Wow.
And for the most part, what we planned from the beginning was we saw support where we thought we'd see support.
Okay.
And it was building on, again, the turnout and results that we saw in the Senate race in 2018. We were able to get thousands more votes than we saw in 2018 for this type of policy platform.
Gotcha.
So there was certainly success in building happening there. And that's what we hope to continue to do in our state going forward as well.
Wow, that's awesome, and I love how you talked about certain county specific. So anyone from Delaware can watch this, and you can get the little nuances of your state, and you can find out some more information there. I want to ask you, what lessons did you learn? And to be more specific, if you could go back in time right now, and even let's say you knew about COVID, what would you have done differently?
Certainly a pandemic changes the way you can run a race. And I think it's really made it very difficult to do the type of direct outreach that we wanted to do. We shut down canvassing in March, and that was our primary way of reaching voters. We moved to the phones, and we had again volunteers and team members who were committed to making those calls, but there's always just going to be people who don't pick up their phone that you just cannot reach that way.
Okay.
So I think lessons are really that you have to build that volunteer net base, focus on that, because you have to make sure that you kind of play bigger than yourself. I think other lessons that even go outside of there being a pandemic is, how do you connect to influencers or leaders within individual communities or groups of people, build those relationships as well. Like, this can't just be about one candidate out there trying to knock every door, trying to get in front of every voter. You really have to build that network of people that are going to be your advocates in the spaces where they have clout, where they have people who trust them. Because you can try to build up that trust, and absolutely you should be trying to build up that trust, but it's hard to do with every single voter. You need advocates who are going to do that for you as well. And I think that's a place where we have to, me personally, I have to keep building those relationships, because that relational organizing, when I say to you, hey, I trust this candidate, I appreciate what they're pushing forward, here's why I believe they're right for us and people like us. When you have other people doing that for you, that goes so much further. Like, you telling your friends, your family, this is why I care about this, that goes further than even my volunteer calling you directly and talking to you about it. Having that person that you trust tell you to trust this person, or to at least consider this person, goes so far. And I think that is incredibly important to build those relationships through community leaders, faith leaders, people who basically have the ability to influence people on your behalf. And I think that is something that is hard to do, and it certainly takes time. And that's what if people should be focused on, and doing it not solely for the goal of advocating for yourself, but doing it because you recognize that building that support and gaining that trust is a way to build solidarity among people in your state and to support each other and to build power for each other.
Nice. So when you first started at the very beginning of your campaign, how many volunteers did you have helping you? And by the end of the campaign, do you know how many volunteers did you have?
Yeah, so probably day one, there were a couple dozen, maybe, I think we had like 30 so people who were like day one volunteers.
Wow, out the gate, you had those amount of
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
So
and
you
that's
use your
from-
networking from the other campaigns that you did to
Exactly.
bring these people in. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah, which was fantastic. And we did one of the very first texting efforts we did was to a list of people that we thought might be willing to be volunteers, to try to bring those people in. By the end, we had a campaign Slack that had 1,000 people in it.
Oh wow.
So at some point, about 1,000 people, or maybe even
Nice.
more than that, had raised their hand and said we were interested in helping this campaign.
Okay.
But we probably had a few hundred people who were active, who would do a phone banking shift weekly or every 2 weeks or so.
Wow, that's awesome. All right, let's
Yeah.
move on to some other questions within the campaign. What progressive organizations are in Delaware, or what progressive organizations helped your campaign, and even any big endorsements helped your campaign?
Yeah, so one of the early organizations and endorsements that we received was from Brand New Congress, which is a fantastic organization that supports candidates that adhere to the types of policies that we're running on: people-focused policy, raising up the working class, rejecting corporate money, all of these things that we know are important to progressive values and to pushing for them. They are a great organization that can help provide volunteers, as well as boosting just your name recognition and getting yourself out there from a kind of national standpoint. Locally, we have organizations like Progressive Democrats of Delaware, which is a group that is obviously committed to pushing progressive Democrats at the state level, as well, and city levels, as well as federal level. And we're really glad to have their support. And I'm trying to think of some others. There were certainly others, and I hate to leave people out.
Yeah.
I think what's important about getting those types of endorsements is that it does open up visibility to your campaign for more people.
Nice.
A lot of endorsements, this is not meant to be a slight. They don't necessarily bring in huge amounts of fundraisers, but they do boost you. They do get you in front of another community or group of people who have a certain issue or ideology that they care about. So it is important to look for those and to find those and to get them. They don't necessarily, it's not like that email goes out and suddenly hundreds of thousands of dollars are pouring in, right?
Yeah.
But they do lend credibility. They do show that this person has looked at the policy you care about and what your stance on those pieces of policy and has vetted you and said, yes, we trust that this person is adhering to the same goals as us, is fighting for the same fight as us.
Gotcha. So yeah, I've heard of the term like ghost endorsement before, where you even get the endorsement, but then there's nothing, literally nothing else comes with that, except for maybe the fact that they endorsed you, but there's no phone back and
there's certainly value in that, and like lending their credibility to you and your campaign. Like again, it does certainly come back to that concept of building that trust, as well as building the reach of people who know you're running and who might be interested in volunteering or caring about the work that you're doing and the race that you're in.
I wonder if do you have any idea of why, like either progressive organizations or progressive leaders, take their time to endorse or don't endorse at all. So, for example, in your case, you didn't, I'm sure you would have loved to have Bernie Sanders endorse you, AOC endorse you, and Cory. I was going to say, no, Charles Booker. I was about to say Cory Booker. In Charles Booker's case, he got the endorsements, but it was kind of too late-ish. If he would have got it maybe a month earlier, who knows if we would have had a Charles Booker versus Mitch McConnell. And man, I would have loved to see that debate. So what do you think, what's the strategy behind that, or what can be causing them to delay their endorsements or not endorse at all?
I mean, there's some people who are simply unwilling to endorse against a fellow party member in their same chamber, for example. Like that might be a reason that people skip a race and stay out of it.
Okay.
It could be that, I think again, like people only they don't necessarily want to spread themselves too thin. Some people choose to say, I'm only going to do this number. And once I find this number, that's what I'm going to focus on, especially if you are providing those candidates with resources, with infrastructure support, with fundraising. Like some of these, there are organizations, I think Justice Democrats is an example of one, where they do quite a bit of work for the candidates that they put on their slate. So they cannot do that for every single candidate, right? They have to pick and choose. And I think the same goes for even elected officials. I think there's this element of, I think maybe some people care about their win record. I don't know. I'm not speaking that specifically about anyone, but I think some people don't necessarily want the storyline to be, oh, you've endorsed 20 people and only 2 of them won, and it looks like your endorsement doesn't matter.
Totally.
I think these are all things that can go into that decision making. I'm not saying any one of them was the case for myself or Charles Booker or any candidate, but there's certainly a calculus that goes into it and weighing the kind of pros and cons of not wanting to be, as you said, a ghost endorser, not wanting to put your name on someone and then just ignore them. And not wanting to necessarily put your name behind someone and not know what they're going to do or how it might impact the future relationships that you have to have. And I understand that there's this kind of political calculus that goes into those things. It's unfortunate, certainly. But I certainly see where it comes from as well.
So Jess, what type of endorser would you be if you were Senator Jessica Scarane and you just got in office? Let's say you're in AOC's position where you've been in office for 2 years and you've been the media darling for a while, and what would be your calculations behind that, or your philosophy?
I think what I talked about is that while campaigning is that we have to be willing to challenge power. We have to be willing to not say, people can't take these things personally. I think there's a lot of, oh, I'm friends with this person, and like you hear it from senators. And it's like, I get that you spend quite a bit of time with them, but when someone really stands against the things that you care about and are fighting for, I don't know that we can say that friendship is more valuable than having someone else who's going to do the work that's necessary.
I totally agree.
That's how I would certainly look at it, is that you don't have to be overly adversarial, but if you're able to say, the reason I'm supporting someone against you is because you fail to advocate for XYZ things, then you're not really out on a limb. Then you're not, you're adhering to your own values. So I think that is the type of endorser I would have liked to be. Maybe he'll be in the future, we'll see. But it's always easy to say that when the pressure's not on you. I recognize that. I think a lot of people sometimes question decisions that people like AOC make, and I think it's easy to sit on the outside and say, well, why wouldn't you just do this?
Yeah.
It's like you don't really know what's kind of happening on the background. You don't know how many. I can't imagine the pressure there is from people who are trying to gain your support, who maybe aren't actually aligned with your values, who are trying to make it seem like they are in an effort to use your credibility for their own benefit. And I understand how that is the thing. I think that would be the element of um, concern for me is how is this person trying to use my credibility
Yeah.
as a way to boost themselves
Okay.
and not really fight the fight, or are they really in the fight? Are they here for doing the work? And I think that is the question that is hard to answer sometimes, but it's
Yeah.
really important to try to dig deep and find the answer to.
Yeah, I'm going to be curious to see what type of endorser Cori Bush is going to be, especially the first time she ran, AOC endorsed her, and of course it was a lot easier because she wasn't a congresswoman yet, a sitting congresswoman yet, and later on, now the second time she ran, AOC did not endorse her, and she's had that experience. She probably built a kind of camaraderie with her opponent, and I wonder, it's going to be interesting to see if she does the same thing with other people, knowing the type of
That
position
it
she
could
was in.
also, yeah, I'm sorry. I was going to say it
Mm.
could also be that I think another piece that goes into the calculation for people is what can they add to your race, and what does an endorsement actually do? And if there's not a space, and I'm not saying this is what happened there, but if
Yeah.
there's not a benefit or there's not a gap that you need filled, maybe they just don't see the value that they bring to endorsing.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. All right. So the next question I want to ask you: what type of opposition did you get from the establishment, from your opponent, and yeah, tell me about that.
Yeah. Well, days before I went public with the launch of my campaign, I did the courteous thing. I called the senator and I said, "Hello, I'm going to be running in this race against you." And honestly, the very first question one of the very few questions he asked was like, "Why are you doing this?" Literally asked, "Why are you doing this?" And I think that was a little bit of the feeling from some of the establishment players in the space, was just like not not seeing the ways in which our senator was failing us. And that's what I saw our campaign's responsibility, right? Like, people do not have the time in their lives, particularly if you are struggling, to look into the record of your elected officials. It is challenging. It's challenging to know what votes are being taken. It's challenging to know how you personally would have wanted your representative to vote and what direction is right, and then to see how they did. But that's what we saw. It was our job to expose that record. I think the other things that we ran into were really just the strategy that our opponent took was to completely ignore us, like outright.
Yeah.
Pretend you don't exist.
Wow.
Refuse to debate. Refuse to acknowledge that we existed. Like, there was he certainly sent mailer after mailer all summer saying vote for me in the primary, but there was no acknowledgement of our candidacy. And I think it was really frustrating for quite a few people, myself included, because it's incredibly dismissive. And but I get it strategically. You don't want to give any air to your opponent when you're an incumbent. You don't want to bring attention to the fact that people have choice and that there's someone else that might be better aligned with them. But it's something that we have to figure out how to break through, particularly if we're not going to get the ability to debate, particularly if we're not going to get regular media coverage of the work that we're doing and the things that we're running on. Our state party says they stay neutral. However, in the weeks before the election, a mailer went out that said, "Here's the endorsed Democratic candidates."
Wow.
With, from the federal delegation down, all the statewide candidates, and anyone who had a primary was like marked with an asterisk saying like, "Oh yeah, they have a primary." But
Wow.
there's still value in sending a mailer out that says, "Here's the Democratic endorsed candidates." Even doing those endorsements, the party, basically the way our party is structured in our state, this is definitely in the weeds stuff, but
Yeah, no problem.
right, like there's these representative district committees. So each state house district has a committee that's associated with the Democratic Party. In the city of Wilmington, there's wards, so the city's kind of broken up into different wards. And they have the opportunity to recommend for an endorsement. And all of those recommendations happen. Some of them happen without even us getting a chance to speak to the committee. All of them happened before the primary. So the party ends up endorsing a candidate even before the primary and saying, like, this is our preferred candidate. So there was that point of frustration where you're like, the line is we stay neutral in primaries, but the actions clearly are not that. So you're going to run into those types of things. And it's, I don't necessarily know how you break through it yet. I mean, I think you could try to maybe a strategy is get people on those RD committees that are going to be more supportive of progressive candidates. That's certainly something that's a way to build strength and power within the party.
Yeah.
We could then maybe influence the rules as well and say if there's a primary election, there's no endorsement, there's no media, there's no money spent in support of any candidate until after that election. But it is frustrating. I mean, something that I didn't mention before is when you run in the state of Delaware, you don't petition to get on the ballot. You pay to get on the ballot.
Oh, okay.
So when you pay to get on the ballot, it's actually based on, the rate is calculated on the salary of the position that you are running for, how much money that position would make over the term. Yeah. And then it's like 1% of that money, or whatever percent of that.
What do you think about that? What do you think that's what it should be? What do you think?
I mean, it meant that we had to spend $10,000 to get on the ballot.
Lord.
And after we'd been fundraising, I was like, okay, that's fine. We have this money. We knew that was coming. It wasn't a surprise.
Okay.
But think about how much of a barrier that is to people who are just like working candidates. And that's what it is for Senate. But even city council in the city of Wilmington is over $1,000 to get your name on the ballot.
Yeah, why isn't it not just get a certain amount of signatures? Because that shows support from, that's almost like a pre-vote, to a certain extent. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, I know that money helps fund the party, and certainly I want the party to have funds and to be strong in our state. But when you then see a mailer kind of coming out that counts your opponent and not you, you're like, well, that's not really what I want our funds going to.
Exactly.
So I don't know that petitioning has its issues too. I mean, there's always legal challenges to people's petitions. Then you got to hire a lawyer, an election lawyer, to try to support you. So I think the no matter what tool parties or states are using to get on the ballot, they are going to be seen as prohibitive, particularly to working class people, because when you see numbers like just $1,000 to get your name on the ballot in the city, that amount of money, $10,000 to put your name on the ballot for Senate, that amount of money is like difference making in people's lives. And to say I have to put that aside simply to be allowed to have people vote for me, I think that is something that is really off-putting to people, and I'd love to find a better way to open that up.
I'm sure that $10,000 you could have used that in the campaign yourself. Like you could have maybe buy a radio ad or buy flyers or buy banners and use it towards a fundraising event, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Right, absolutely. I mean, $10,000 is not a small amount of money to be spending in a campaign like a grassroots campaign like ours. Thankfully, like I said, we knew that's what it was going to cost us. We knew we had to prepare for that, but it's not how I want to use the money. We're a campaign that had an average donation of about $30. We're talking about people giving us money in these small donation amounts, like working people who it matters to them to give $20, $30, and it's frustrating when you can't turn that money into direct voter contact.
Gotcha. Let me ask you this question, because I live in New Jersey and Cory Booker is up for election, and I don't see any TV ads, anything. So it's kind of like what you just said, where he's not, I don't even know he's running, but that's because he's so popular that he knows he's just going to get the vote, and he's running on that ticket, that B line, and with all the other establishment Democrats. So I wonder if we should have some kind of rule or law that you have to have one or maybe two debates in the primary and one or two debates in the general. What do you think about that? Like a requirement?
I mean, I think those are things that I think that should be advocated for, certainly by the party. I think that any attempts to prevent people from having the information that they need to make the choice that's right for them is inappropriate. Like, there were even candidate surveys that my opponent didn't respond to in like the newspaper, where they just were unwilling to sort of put their record and their views out there in the primary. And I think that is probably because a lot of them are unpopular. You know, the state of Delaware is a state that, when polled repeatedly now, has over 70% or almost 70% support for Medicare for all. Has almost or over 70% support for Green Deal. Like, these are the policies that people in Delaware are asking for, but we don't have representatives that are fighting for them. And I think it's important to help people see that. And I understand why the party doesn't want it to, or why incumbents don't want to. Name recognition, particularly in a statewide race, is a huge asset. When you are the name that people know, even if the candidate listed next to you on the ballot better aligns with their values, if I and my team haven't had a chance to have that one-on-one conversation with them, which is hard, like with the funds that often insurgent campaigns have, they're not necessarily going to have the time to do that research. And that is why things like debates, things like candidate surveys, things like newspaper and media coverage are incredibly important, but they are continually a challenge to get for progressive and insurgent challenger candidates. You know, it's a thing that I think we have to figure out how we break through. I think there's a good amount of now kind of more national left media, particularly shows like this and people who have spun up with their own followings. But on the local level, those things don't always exist. And that is actually one of the things that we're seeing kind of grow in our state, is there are people who are working on that to say we need left media at a local level. And we need to build a following, because there's not enough of challenging power. There's not enough of calling out the record of our elected officials in a state like ours. And I think in part, you know, that is not so much an issue in like Jersey and New York. Like, they kind of love like being rough on their politicians. But in a state like Delaware, I think particularly because of its size, there is this, you know, this idea that we're a state of neighbors and everyone kind of knows each other. And that's seen as a positive. And in a lot of ways, it absolutely is. But it also means that we're not always challenging power. We're not always calling out decisions that stand against the
so you
needs of working people in our state.
So you brought up independent media, and I'm curious. That's a good question that I didn't think about before. After doing, because I saw you were on the Humanist Report, you were on Katie Harper's show and other progressive media shows. What type of bump did you get? Did you get a volunteers bump? Did you get a fundraising bump? Did you see something obvious?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think those things always, particularly with volunteers, help. And definitely donations as well. I think that that's one great asset of being able to get on some national media and get national coverage, is that there is a huge body of people across the country who are able to phone bank from anywhere, who are able to donate from anywhere. Those shows, those magazine pieces, whatever it might be, I guess I'm calling an online publication a magazine. But those are the things that definitely help build that awareness for people who are looking for a place to put the energy that they have to fight for frankly a better future that we need. So yes, those things are absolutely valuable. It's hard, it doesn't always necessarily tie though to voters in your state if they are not watchers of that show. So you have to find a way to like bring that same platform more locally, I think.
So I'm curious, how hard was it to get in contact with these guys, like to find their information? And I don't know if you did TYT. Let me know if you did. But I think like even to get for a candidate to get to like TYT's level, I wonder how the average person out there that's thinking about running, give them a tip on that.
Yeah, well, I think in some ways I was lucky that people reached out to me.
Oh, nice.
Who just like were able, who I think either because of our Twitter, predominantly our Twitter presence, where we kind of broke through to people in some cases. I think we were running against a senator that many people already had issues with or opinions about. So the fact that there was someone challenging him became particularly appealing. But we were able to get on, I think, shows like the Majority Report.
Sam Cedar, I think you were on also. Yeah, that's Sam Cedar with Majority Report. Yeah, Humanist Report, Katie Hopper, and
Yeah, and what's John Idarolla's show? Damage Report.
Oh, Damage Report.
Yes. Like they actually reached out to us.
Oh, nice.
But then we had someone who later in the campaign who became our press outreach person.
Oh, okay.
And who, a lot of times, people who run these shows, you can find their contact information. You can just DM them on Twitter often too, and because they want to bring guests on. And often, what we would start doing is like we were just pitching ideas, so that it's not on the person who's writing the story or the person who hosts the show to kind of come up with what should we talk about. If you can help do the work for them, you can say like, I'd love to come on and talk about XYZ thing that's going on in the world, in the country, in our state, in our campaign.
Oh, nice.
That can sometimes help too. So that some of that, you take some of that workload off of the host of the show.
Was that press person a super volunteer, or did you hire them? I'm just curious.
Yes, actually, they were.
Oh, nice. Okay, so let's go. I want to ask you about my idea, and it's a staple that I always ask everybody because I really want to flush this idea out before it becomes official. And you, as a former candidate, I would love to get your opinion of the People's Gauntlet, and I'm going to put it in the description of this video so that anyone listening can definitely listen to the full vision for the video. But I know Jess has watched that video, and I'll just throw it to you. Tell me what you think about it. The goods and the bad, just give me everything.
Yeah, so I'll give a little background for anybody who doesn't know before they get to the description. You know, you're trying to put forward this kind of vetting gauntlet, right?
Exactly.
You have identified, I think, probably almost 30 policy points that are important to progressive left movement and ideology. And I believe your ask is put together videos, talk on each of these topics, and let's hear your stances on them, so that we can determine whether you're really aligned with our vision and our beliefs. And I think that what I really like about that idea is actually something that I tried to do in our campaign, is that I think it's really valuable for voters to hear people talk on these topics and to get a stance on how they take a policy position and actually tie it to their district or to their state. Because making these things local is incredibly important. And tying it specifically to the issues that someone may be facing is incredibly important. When you talk about something like a Green New Deal, like you can talk about it. In Delaware, we can talk about it. You know, there's neighborhoods that flood every time it rains. And part of that is because we're a state that's sinking. We're already have the lowest high point in the country, lowest lying state, and we're sinking. We're losing farmland. We're losing our beaches. We have cities that flood every time it rains. Like, we can talk about those things, and I think it's incredibly important that candidates do that, that they don't just use a broad sort of national conversation. They bring it down to be really personal to voters. And I think going through the process of creating videos like that is something I tried to do to help people relate to these policies, to help them understand why I care about them and why they might care about them, to break it down. You know, people hear terms. They hear, you know, we hear, oh, we got to raise the minimum wage, but let's talk about why it hasn't been raised. Let's talk about what it means to actually guarantee a living wage to every single person and a guaranteed wage to every single person in this country. I think it also helps break down the barriers that some people have with these ideas, because I think there has been, for a lot of people, we can't see what we don't already know. It's really hard to imagine a world where everyone is guaranteed a home, because we've never seen that.
Totally.
And it's not, to me, it's not possible. But you have to talk about how you make it possible. You have to talk about why it hasn't happened. And I think what you have tried to say is by creating videos, you can do some of that. I think what's really interesting about the gauntlet, as you've termed it, is you can kind of use it as a scorecard You know, I think there's going to be difference between candidates, particularly depending on the district you're running in. You know, there might be things that are really important in your district that just aren't there that you still have to hit on. There might be things that are in that list that just don't make sense for your district. And I think we have to still be okay with that as a progressive movement, as long as we identify like your core values are about fighting for justice for every single person. Your core values are about lifting up the working class.
Exactly.
Ensuring that we have autonomy over our own lives. Like, as long as we can identify like how you are committed to those things, and we can show that the way that you are committed to that work is through XYZ thing, then yes, we should be welcoming those people into the movement and welcoming them, pushing for them, because I think every single conversation that we have about these topics moves things forward.
Totally.
Every single time someone runs on these values, it opens up someone else's mind.
Yeah.
You know, that's why we were able to build on to get thousands more votes in 2020 than we did for this similar platform in 2018, because we were able to have more conversations, pull more people along. And it's, I think, using that kind of list of policies as a vetting platform and a scorecard of like, where does this person fall? Do they align with me is helpful. And as I said before, like creating these libraries of information about candidates is incredibly important to voters, because it's so hard right now as a voter to figure out, what does this person align with me? And we're going to see more and more, it's already happening, but we're going to see more of these kind of corporate Democrat candidates, these centrist candidates, co-op language.
Totally.
And it's really easy to start saying, they don't exactly say healthcare is a right. Maybe some of them do, but they'll say like access to healthcare is a right. And a lot of people maybe don't hear the difference there. You know, they'll say climate change is an existential threat. But we still can't possibly ask these corporations to stop drilling, you know, so I think it's really easy to pick up the tagline, but it's hard to see how they're backing it up with,
totally. They remain really vague. Like recently, I can't remember her name, but there's a candidate who's running, and I was reading an article about her, and it said how she championed Medicare for all before, and then this time around she is for a public option, you know. And then famously Colin Allred did the same thing, and it's basically holding people to account, and it's kind of forcing people to put their policy to a video so that you know we're going to hold you accountable. And the strength of the People's Gauntlet is when it hopefully gains popularity, so people know, okay, if you want my money, if you want me to volunteer for you, you got to do the People's Gauntlet. Where's your People's Gauntlet? You know, where's your YouTube page channel so that I can look up your opinion of Palestine and Israel foreign policy conflict? Because like you said, you know, to your district, there's going to be a majority of people who might not really necessarily know about it or necessarily care about it, but it is a big deal when it comes to foreign policy. So I'm glad that it sounds like you're on board, and I really am looking forward to that. We're going to get that idea going very soon, and I'm looking forward to that being a big part of our organizing. I want that to be a part of, you know, in a lot of my favorite shows, they all say, man, we're so disorganized. Even on my show with my political junkies, we say, the left is so disorganized. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah. So
you absolutely see that, right?
Totally.
You need these things to coalesce around.
Yeah.
I've definitely had these conversations with, you know, members of my team and friends of, I think vetting and getting people who are really committed is incredibly important, but I think we have to be careful not to just turn into the same gatekeepers that the establishment has become. You know, like there's a balance there that we have to find, and I don't know that we're there yet, but I think that's always something that's in the back of my mind too, is that I don't think we want to become such a centralized movement that there's only a certain set of people who can make the decision about whether worthy of running and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so that's why I'm going to be very passionate about how it is going to be implemented. So like if the Humanist reports, if he endorses it, right? And my goal is that when people run for office, they would put up their People's Gauntlet, and then a lot of the progressive media, they can watch it and then decide who they want to bring on their show. It'll almost be like a reward.
It becomes a resource for everybody.
A resource for everybody. And I don't have a requirement on the People's Gauntlet at all. I want it to be at your own leisure. How do you want to use it? And I'm talking to the progressive media. So I'm not going to say, hey, you have to have them go through the People's Gauntlet before they go on your show.
Right.
No, is at your discretion. You might like a certain leg of the People's Gauntlet, the justice leg of the People's Gauntlet, and you might say, hey, you know what? At the very least, like let's say you're the Human Century Report, you say at the very least you need to do the social justice gauntlet to even come on my show. Or somebody else, Nico House might say, you need to do the environmental or the whatever gauntlet that is dear to his heart. Or maybe somebody TYT might say you have to do all the gauntlets to even think about coming on TYT. So that's hope, and that's up to them. I'm not going to require. I want it to be as independent as possible. All right, so we're coming down to the wire. I got like about 10 more minutes with you, so let's get into some fun stuff now. I want to get into some back to strategy.
Oh, you haven't been having fun?
Oh, we've been having fun, but I want to get down to some real interesting stuff as far as where we go from here. Let's say in a fantasy world, because I definitely don't want Donald Trump to win. And to be honest with you, I don't think I'm going to be voting for Biden, but I do want him to win. But let's say we get the presidency, the House, and the Senate. Where does the progressive movement go from there? What is our strategy? I'm going to let you speak first, and then I'm going to give my idea of where we should go or what we should focus on. All right, so I'm not going to lead the witness. You go ahead first, Jess.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think that we should not sit back. I don't think that we should say, okay, let's see what this administration is going to put forward and then critique it. I think we should say this is the body of policy that we want to put forward and fight for. And I think it has to look like, particularly given the moment that we are in, where we still have 1,000 people dying a day because of COVID-19. We have people we have allowed a public health crisis to turn into an economic crisis, which is now cascading into a housing crisis. People losing their homes because they've been out of work, they still can't go back, and there's been no protection for them. So I think we have to put together a package that addresses all of these issues in the moment, but also prevents them from happening in the future. So it should be about economic autonomy and rights. It should be about housing rights. Like we have to put something together that says we are going to, even if it's extending Medicare in its current form to everyone, so that people aren't panicking about the idea of losing their livelihood because they get sick. Even if it's putting eviction protections in place nationally and supporting people that way, canceling rent. These are the things that we should be pushing for to make sure that maybe they're not the long-term package or view, but we absolutely have to sort of do that backstopping right now and then say, what does this look like going forward? And I think it has to not be piecemeal. I really think it should be a New Deal-esque level of package, because we should not be coming at this as if we are in a place where tweaks are going to solve the problem. We should really be saying, what is it that we need to advocate for economic, environmental, and justice, economic change, environmental change, and justice in this country, and that is what we should be putting forward day one.
Okay.
I think that we also have to look at outside of electoral politics. How do we organize people, bring people together? I think labor movement is incredibly important there.
Okay.
We are at a place where I think that our labor union participation in the country is down to like 10% or something like that.
Yeah.
Like that is a place where we can absolutely build power, and it gives people the ability to fight for their rights within the workplace, but it also gives the ability to organize and to have power that we can call on later. Because that is something that hit me so hard through this spring, this pandemic, is that, you just said it, people aren't organized. We don't have that power to call on. If we had tenants unions, then when you're in a place where you've all lost your jobs and you can't pay your rent, you have that organization of you and your neighbors to call on and go to your landlord and basically say, we're not paying rent, right? Like those are things that we need to establish now, so we have those powers to call on and to fight for the things that we need. And I think we have to kind of parallel path. We can't just say we don't have organization right now. We don't have power right now, so we have to build that.
Yeah.
We absolutely have to keep fighting for the policies we need, but we have to recognize that we need to build the power behind them, kind of in a parallel path alongside that.
Okay. So those are some awesome ideas. This is the ideas that I'm thinking about, and I'm going to discuss with my political junkies. We have a show this Monday at 8:30, and the first idea that I have is a 1,000,000-man march for Medicare for all during COVID. Now you might say, 1,000,000-man march. We got COVID going on right now, so let me throw this word in there: a virtual 1,000,000-man march. So it would be very interesting, and I'm hoping that the way this would have to be organized is like all the progressives need to come together and announce these together. So like we would need a TYT, a Kyle Kalinske, a Humanist Report, a Nico House, a Majority Report. I'm naming everybody. Nomiki Konst. All of the progressives movement come together and we're saying, boom, on this date, we're going to have a virtual march for Medicare for all, almost similar to like how the People's Convention, the Movement for People's Party, they had their convention, and maybe have everybody speak. And I think what would, especially, and AOC has to be there. Like we need to have our progressive leaders. Bernie Sanders has to be there. There's no excuse. I'm not going to play these games like, oh, I'm going to stand out. No, we need to put, as the people, as the grassroots, we got to put pressure on them to speak there, even if it's for 5 minutes, but to lend their name to it so that we do get those 1,000,000 views. And hopefully that's going to be the pressure that, and can also get headlines. The same way AOC got headlines for getting, doing the Among Us game on Twitch, and that went everywhere. Everybody was talking about that. We need this to be that sort of event. And then the next thing that we need to think about and strategize around is the Speaker of the House. You know, we heard that Nancy Pelosi just announced that she wants to run again. So we need to find out if it's Barbara Lee or if it's, I think her last name is Bass. If we need to come up with someone, I'm sorry, Karen Bass, I believe her name is, right?
Karen Bass.
Correct. And we need to come up with someone that's legitimate. Because, I mean, we could go in the fantasy world and say, oh, AOC or Ro Khanna. To be honest, I don't know if they have their colleagues vote. That's what I'm thinking about, strategizing. Do they have their own colleagues votes? AOC is too young. They're going to be jealous enough to say, nah, I don't want that young person to be. Imagine if she's like 32 speaker. That's not happening. But Barbara Lee, who has a lot of wealth of progressive clout backed up because she was the only person to vote against the Iraq war. And then I think she has the respect of her colleagues. If we can, as the progressive movement, push her so that at the very least, this pushes Nancy Pelosi, who might still become speaker, but it pushes her to the left at least, right? So that's number 2. And then ranked choice voting. So this is a year that we've had a lot of voter shaming on Twitter. A ton of, oh, you're voting for third party candidate. You're trying to come up with a new party. Oh, this and that. Well, you know what? There's a solution, and it's called ranked choice voting. So if you want to have a Democratic majority moving forward, you have to at least have an opportunity for someone like me to give you my second round vote or my third round vote. And that would be my compromise with you to get my vote, is to give me ranked choice voting. So those are my 3 things. I'm not going to talk too much. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, just to start from at the end there's a group that is organizing around ranked choice voting in Delaware. And I think that there is, particularly what you're getting at, where people feel like they have to maybe vote strategically, but not necessarily vote aligned to their values. If you have ranked choice, that does open that up for people. I think it also can help with getting people to run who might otherwise not. And potentially it could help kind of break down some of the party power that exists, where it's just this very much like everyone kind of runs to their side and stays there. So I know that there are people organizing around that in Delaware.
I mean, they have it in Maine, and Massachusetts is on the ballot right now. So I think that would. I'm so excited about it growing. I just joined an organization in New Jersey that is fighting for it to happen there. So that's definitely one of my passion projects that I'm hoping that we're going to be able to get accomplished. So what do you think about the million virtual march? Maybe a YouTube channel that we would do it on, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think these basically pressure campaigns
Yeah.
that show how many people there are who are committed to these causes are important.
Yeah.
And I think it's not only what do you do that one day, but then what do you give that million people to do after that?
That's
right?
true
if you
too.
Can get
Yeah.
that many people to show up for one thing.
Yeah.
What can you get them to show up for next?
Yeah.
What can they take action with? I know I'm personally tired of just being told like, well, you know, email, call, reach out to your congressperson. Like, I think we're beyond that for a lot of people. I think there's energy to do more than that.
Okay.
So yes, like if you can get that many people to show up and say the cause is Medicare for all, like to fight for that, that's fantastic. What do they do next? And that's like where I think we have to keep building, because I think sometimes there's so many people who have energy and they just don't know where to put it.
Yeah.
They're like, do I do a local thing? Do I do a national thing? Is it enough to call my representative? Is it not? Like, should I be trying to show up in their office? Like, I think we have to do a better job at telling people the actions that they can take and doing them together and making sure that numbers show up.
See, I love this conversation, and I love that you brought that up, because we're strategizing right here in real time, guys. And I see Dan. I see you in the comments, Dan. Much love to you. So I'm thinking, the first thing when you said that, I'm wondering, like, okay, maybe it shouldn't be an all-day event, kind of like the convention that the Movement for People's Party had, like an all-day thing. Maybe it should be like a 1 hour like a Moral Mondays thing, like that event. Maybe once a week, every Friday for an hour, you just have a million people come to this cast and they promote Medicare for all. But then the action comes in where you promote to those people to call their congressperson or to whatever next step.
Yeah.
Right?
What can they do after that?
Yeah.
Because I think you're right. Your inclination is totally right, that when you get people to show up in numbers, it draws attention. You
totally
get media coverage. You get the attention of people who are elected. But how do you keep that momentum? How do you actually turn it into a pressure campaign that continues that pressure? And I think that's where we aren't necessarily there yet. That's not to say we're not going to get there, but that's where we got to be looking, because even locally, like we had I'm going to do the Delaware specific thing, but there were some gun bills that were going to be considered at a state level. And they ended up not being the Democratic leadership, Democratic majority in our state House and Senate ended up not bringing them up to a vote because of pressure. But that was like a couple hundred people. Like,
oh wow.
You know what I mean?
Like,
it was basically like a couple hundred people that weren't happy about the gun bill showed up, and maybe only 100 people who were happy about the gun bill showed up, and it kind of just it affected things.
Okay.
So particularly when we're talking about local issues, you can get a few dozen people, 100 people together to show up repeatedly and to push for what you want. And I think the numbers can be smaller on a local level.
Okay.
So but people don't necessarily know exactly what actions to take. They know they have this energy. They know they want things different. What they need are leaders, organizers, activists to kind of show them these are the steps that we're going to take, and we're going to take it on this day together. But we're going to also do it 5 more times. So we're going to show up this many more times to make it clear that this wasn't just a one-time thing. That we didn't just send canned text messages or canned emails one time and we blew up their inbox for some poor intern that had to deal with it and then they didn't get the message. Like, you know, like I think that people are starting to recognize that, like, when they email their congressperson, their senator, they get their generic form email back, but they've already made up their mind. It doesn't change. So I think it has to be a continual pressure campaign. This is also why I care really deeply about getting money out of politics.
Totally.
Like, we have seen how the influence of money in politics have completely decoupled what the people want from what the elected officials push for.
Totally.
So it's not only showing up, it's also structural change to this system that has completely failed us to this point.
Totally. Thank you, Jess, for coming on the Progressive War Room. The last question I'm going to ask you is, will you run again? And
Oh, the question everyone asks me. No, I mean, I'm not counting it out by any
Okay,
means. I
okay.
think
So
that,
no plans as of right now?
yeah, not right now,
Okay.
but we'll see what happens.
Okay.
There's certainly things that can kind of change in the next couple of years, and I'm here. I'm down for the fight in Delaware and in this country, so I'm not going anywhere.
And also, if you want to plug anybody who is running, anyone that you want to plug right now, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I mentioned at the top that there are some really great candidates running in Delaware.
Okay.
Particularly if you're local, if you're able to poll greet or kind of help in these next few days, or if you're able to phone bank from anywhere. Some of them are Stephanie Barry. She's running to flip a seat from a Republican to a Democrat. She ran before and actually lost only by about 400 votes. So we're
Wow.
looking to get her over the line. Stephanie
Wow.
Barry. Marie Pinkney is running in our state Senate. We have Medina Wilson Anton running in our state house, Eric Morrison, and Larry Lambert. I can actually provide info for you.
Yeah,
but
please.
people should care about the state of Delaware. We make the laws that govern your credit card companies. We make the laws that govern the business courts, that all of these corporations are coming to our courts to fight their lawsuits. So Delaware matters on a national stage, and we really have an opportunity to start making a state general assembly that cares about working people and fights for working people this year.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So you said you have information of those people that you want
I'll
to
share
go.
it with you, Case. And
Okay, sounds good. And I'll put it in the description below.
Absolutely.
I'm going to tweet it out as well. And thank you so much for your time. I hope you had fun. I had a lot of fun, like us flushing out the strategy idea. You gave me some thoughts about that Million Man March that I'm going to think about and bring it to my guys. And thank you so much. You have a great one, everyone out there. And we're going to strategize together. This is Progressive War Room. And I want you to run for something. That's what this is about. You come here and you learn about the different lessons learned and the things that we could have done better. And I look forward to the next time. Have a good one, everyone. Bye-bye.